Silence, when chosen consciously, is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is the space where one refuses to be rushed into defense or explanation. For a woman who has often been told to justify herself, silence becomes a reclamation of space. It is the difference between speaking to be understood and standing firm in already understanding oneself. In that silence, that is the number R, there is no desperation to be seen, there is only the steady presence of one who knows she already exists beyond question. When she does not explain, she is not surrendering her voice, she is redirecting it. She chooses not to scatter her words on ears that are not ready to listen. In this way, her silence is not submission, but selection. It is the careful guarding of her energy, so that her words are spent on creation, not justification. This silence is strength, because it requires discipline. That is the number R, the discipline to resist the pull of proving, the discipline to let misunderstanding linger without rushing to correct it. There is a kind of authority that silence carries, one that explanations cannot. Words can be debated, twisted, or dismissed, but silence stands unmovable. It says, I do not need to persuade you. I do not need your agreement to continue existing as I am. This stance unsettles those who rely on doubt as a tool of control, for silence offers no handhold, no weakness to exploit. It is not an absence of response. It is a response in itself, one that speaks of self-possession. Silence also transforms the woman who chooses it. In those moments of not explaining, she listens more deeply, not to others, but to herself. She becomes aware of the small places where she used to bend and adjust to be accepted, and she notices how unnecessary that bending has always been. This inner listening is a strengthening act. She is not proving her worth outwardly, but reinforcing it inwardly. Through silence, she grows unshakable because she roots herself not in the shifting opinions of others, but in her own quiet certainty. And so, silence reveals itself not as passive, but as active power. It is the quiet refusal to engage in battles that do not need to be fought. It is the calm decision to let go of arguments that drain life rather than nourish it. It is the subtle but firm statement, I am whole without explanation. In that soft withdrawal from the compulsion to justify, the woman finds a power more enduring than any loud defense could give her. To stop explaining is to stop granting permission. For too long, many women have been conditioned to hand over their decisions, their dreams, and their being for review, as if their lives were papers awaiting approval. Every justification, every explanation offered in defense of a choice is an unspoken invitation. Judge me, confirm me, validate me. But when a woman withdraws that invitation, she closes the door to the endless cycle of approval seeking. Her silence becomes a boundary. She is no longer an open file to be examined, but a sealed presence that needs no stamp of acceptance. Withholding permission is not about shutting people out. It is about refusing to let others dictate the ground she stands on. It means she no longer entertains questions that come laced with doubt or suspicion, instead of bending under the weight of, why did you do that? Or, what makes you think you can? She recognizes those questions for what they are, attempts to place her on trial, and she chooses to step away from the courtroom entirely. The verdict of others no longer decides her movement. There is a freedom that comes when a woman takes back this permission, without the burden of constant justification. She moves with greater ease, unshackled from the need to explain her every step. Her choices, once weighed and measured by outsiders, now carry the lightness of being fully her own. This shift is subtle, yet profound. Her life no longer bends around the expectations of others, but unfolds according to her own inner rhythm. Withholding permission means she is free to live unmeasured, unjudged, and unknown. And when she withholds permission, something else emerges: respect. People may not always agree with her, but they begin to sense that she is not seeking their agreement. This creates a different kind of relationship, not one built on compliance or persuasion, but on presence. Even in silence, she communicates clearly, "I am not here to convince you. I am here to live." In that stance, she stops being a figure to be controlled and becomes one to be reckoned with. To refuse explanation is to remove the ladder by which others climb into her life and rearrange her space. It is to guard the sacred ground of her being and say, without words, "This belongs to me." No longer does she extend permission for her motives to be dissected or her worth to be debated. She holds her choices close, not as secrets, but as treasures belonging to no one else's authority. And in doing so, she reclaims the quiet sovereignty that was always hers to begin with. Every time a woman explains herself unnecessarily, she spends energy that cannot be reclaimed. Each justification, each defense is a transfer of her inner power outward, often to those who are not listening to understand, but to measure, question, or diminish. Energy is life itself, and when it is poured into endless explanations, it leaks away in small, unnoticed streams. Over time, she begins to feel drained, not because her life is too heavy, but because she has been carrying the burden of convincing others that her life is worthy. Protecting her energy begins with recognizing its value. Just as one guards their home against theft, she learns to guard her spirit against the quiet stealing of doubt and unnecessary defense. Energy is not infinite. It must be conserved for growth, for creation, for love, and for healing. When she stops explaining herself, she stops handing pieces of her energy to those who do not nurture her. In doing so, she begins to keep her vitality intact, stored for what truly matters. There is also wisdom in this act of preservation. Energy invested in self-defense is energy that could have been used for building dreams, strengthening her body, or nourishing her inner peace. A woman who protects her energy by refusing to justify herself discovers she has more strength available for her own path. The energy once lost in convincing now fuels her becoming. What once went into defending her choices now flows into deepening them. The shift is quiet, but it transforms her daily existence. And in protecting her energy, she becomes less reactive and more intentional. She no longer feels compelled to respond to every misunderstanding or critique. Instead, she chooses carefully where to place her words, her emotions, and her presence. This restraint is not withdrawal, it is mastery. It shows that she understands the sacredness of her energy and that it is not to be spent recklessly. By conserving her power, she radiates more of it, like a flame that burns steadier because it is sheltered from the wind. Protecting her energy is also an act of self-respect. It is the recognition that she is not a resource for others to consume at will. She is not here to satisfy every curiosity, soothe every doubt, or mend every misjudgment directed her way. Her energy is precious and it belongs to her. By ceasing to explain, she declares without words that she chooses where her life force flows, and it will not be wasted on those who cannot receive it with care. To live by presence rather than proof is to understand that existence itself is enough. A woman who no longer explains has discovered that her worth is not built on the scaffolding of evidence, arguments, or external approval. She is not a case to be argued in court, nor a thesis to be defended. She is a presence, complete, undeniable, and real. Proof belongs to the world of debate, but presence belongs to the world of truth. And truth, when embodied, requires no explanation. When she steps into presence, her actions carry a quiet clarity. She does not speak to convince, she speaks to express. She does not move to justify, she moves to live. Her life becomes less about performing for acceptance and more about embodying her essence. In this way, her presence communicates more than words ever could. It is a language beyond defense, one that does not beg for recognition, but naturally commands it. Presence has a way of silencing doubt without confrontation. Where proof invites argument, presence allows no foothold for resistance. People may still question her, but the way she carries herself shifts the ground beneath their questions. She no longer meets them with explanations, but with the calm certainty of one who knows she does not need to be proven. In her steadiness, those around her begin to sense that explanations are unnecessary, not because they are absent, but because her being itself is the answer. The power of presence also lies in its simplicity. Proof often grows complicated. Lists of reasons, webs of defense, rehearsed responses to anticipated doubt. But presence is direct and unadorned. It is simply showing up as oneself, unapologetic and unaltered. It does not chase after acceptance. It invites alignment. In this simplicity, she finds freedom, for there is nothing left to prove when all she seeks is to live truthfully in her own form. And so, by choosing presence over proof, she stops performing the endless labor of justification. She no longer spends her days gathering evidence for why she belongs, why she is capable, why she is enough. Instead, she embodies those truths wordlessly. Her life itself becomes the proof she refuses to provide, unspoken, undeniable, and beyond argument. Through presence, she is no longer a voice straining to explain, but a being who simply is, and that is more powerful than any defense could ever be. To be misunderstood is often uncomfortable, yet it is also unavoidable. No matter how much explaining one gives, not all hearts will be open, not all minds will be ready. A woman who stops explaining accepts this truth: misunderstanding is not her enemy, nor is it her responsibility to correct. She allows others to hold their version of her, knowing that their perception is theirs to carry, not hers to fix. In this release, she finds a deeper freedom than any explanation could ever provide. When she allows herself to be misunderstood, she is no longer chained to the endless labor of correction. That is the number R. She does not run after every distortion of her image, trying to polish it until it shines the way she wishes to be seen. Instead, she lets the distortions exist, knowing they cannot change who she truly is. Like clouds that shift and pass across the sky, people's opinions move and fade, while the vastness of her being remains unchanged. This understanding gives her strength that explanations could never secure. The power lies in her calmness. To remain unshaken when someone misreads her is to display a confidence deeper than words. It is to say, without saying, "You may see me wrongly, but I do not lose myself in your eyes." This steadiness unsettles those who expect her to defend herself. They may search for cracks. They may press for explanations, but she gives them none. Her silence tells a greater story, that she is anchored in her own truth, and that their misunderstanding cannot dislodge it. That is the number R, There is also wisdom in choosing which misunderstandings to leave untouched. Not every misjudgment requires correction, and not every false impression deserves energy. By allowing misunderstandings to exist, she learns discernment. She saves her voice for what truly matters. She knows that clarity will reveal itself in time, often through her actions, her presence, and her way of living, rather than through rushed words. In this way, she transforms misunderstanding into a teacher, guiding her to patience and restraint. To embrace misunderstanding is to accept imperfection in how one is seen. And in this acceptance, she ceases to be controlled by the gaze of others. She no longer fears being misread, for she knows that even if the world misunderstands her, she remains whole within herself. The power of misunderstanding is not in correcting it, but in rising above it. And when she does, she moves through life untangled, untouched by the constant demand to be fully seen, and free to exist in the wholeness that explanations can never contain.